When you think of a piece of art, what's the first thing that pops into your mind? For some of you, that may be a beautiful painting, your favorite movie, or maybe even a song that speaks to you. However, rather than the art itself, we are more so reminded of the feelings that a piece of art left with us. Serenity, sorrow, happiness, and fear are just a few of the emotions that art can evoke in a person. But part of what makes something art to me, personally, is the ability of a piece to be something that speaks to everyone on some level. The power to convey emotions that are too complex to be simply summarized into a few words is the advantage art has. For most people, this can apply to any movie, song, or painting they like. However, once we go into the realm of video games being seen as art, everything gets a little strange. When most people think of video games, they usually wouldn't consider them art, but merely as a more basic form of entertainment. This has always confused me a lot when people say this to me, because video games are the culmination of many different forms of art coming together to make something completely different. Part of the reason I think people see games in this way is the approach that the most popular games take in their main target audience. The target audience for most of these game companies is young men, so most of the more popular games in the media focus on the feeling of empowerment. Mainstream games really show this trend with the overwhelming popularity of the shooter genre over the last decade and a half, along with the now not so recent spike in popularity of the Battle Royale. And while Journey came out about 8 years ago at the time of this video, much of the market has still remained the same, with titles like Call of Duty still performing just as well as they used to, with Activision reporting that in 2019, Modern Warfare has pulled in over $1 billion of revenue for the company. So now we come back to Journey, which in a way is an antithesis to the more action and empowerment driven games that dominate the industry. That game company, when designing Journey, instead tried to broaden their target audience to not just young men, but to everyone. The main inspiration to create a game like this, in the game's director Jenova Chan's words, was to help grow the industry and bring in a new audience of people to the gaming industry. His way to do this was to heavily incentivize players to play cooperatively with one another. This was done by the game focusing on establishing a positive connection between players seamlessly thanks to some interesting design choices when making the multiplayer. Unlike most games during the time, in Journey, you couldn't invite your friends to play, there were no usernames shown in the game, and there were no lobbies. Everything worked together in real time to create a very immersive experience and at the same time made it very accessible to people who aren't very familiar with video games. This design philosophy focused on immersion permeates pretty much through everything else in the game, which helps create an amazing sense of atmosphere and scale. The atmosphere grips you right from the beginning and doesn't let up throughout the entire runtime of the game, which if you aren't rushing would take you probably between 2 to 3 hours. What brings the atmosphere to life is the incredible art and sound design over at that game company, and the way both of these work together to make an immersive experience. From the start of the game, you are greeted with the game's beautiful visuals, with one of my favorite menu screens in gaming. This is accompanied by a somber piece to help set the tone of the game going forward. You start the game with no objectives, only the looming mountain to walk towards, surrounded by a seemingly endless desert. What immediately caught my eye when first playing Journey was the fantastic art direction which is consistent throughout the whole game. Matt Nava, the lead artist for Journey, talks about how games can not only just be high action or mindless distractions, but instead provide an art experience. All of the artistic choices in the game are centered around the focus on building a positive experience with other players. To do this, they need to get rid of all of the barriers that stood in the way of players communicating with each other. The first and most obvious of these barriers is language, which is why your player character doesn't speak. And the second barrier being ethnicity, which is why the player character has a mask on. The design of the main characters changed a lot until they finally settled on the final product, which in my opinion looks perfect. The design of the player character makes it really easy for people to project themselves onto, which allows for them to be more immersed in the world much more easily. I personally really enjoy the little details that they put in with the player character, like how the little markings or runes change depending on how many times you played through the game. Even the choice to have the game setting be in the desert was made to make interactions with other players feel special. The barren and desolate desert makes social interactions all the more special because you don't expect to see anyone in the wasteland. This brings us to the levels themselves, and how they do such an amazing job telling a story without the use of dialogue. Since Journey doesn't have any words throughout its entirety, Matt Nava needed to find a different way to tell a story in an effective way. He does this by using color throughout the game. By choosing a mood they want you to feel within each level, they choose a single color and expanded those into larger color schemes that they would use for the levels. The goal was trying to create different atmospheres for the different stages of life. We start in the very bright desert levels with lots of warm colors, which makes the player feel very safe and comfortable. Eventually, when we fall into the large hole in the ground and begin to travel through the underground tunnels, the color scheme fades into a deep blue-green scheme, which makes the area feel very mysterious and alien. The game gives you a slight break as you climb through the tower, by throwing a lot of warm colors in before you leave into the desolate tundra. The tundra has a very muted and cold color scheme, which fits perfectly with what the area is trying to make you feel. This foreboding and unforgiving atmosphere is everywhere throughout the level, and it even shows in the color of the buildings, moving away from the more brownish colors to a much more cold and intimidating stone. However, the final level offers something completely different, a beautiful blue sky and waterfalls in the clouds. Matt Nava said he saved the blue as a reward for the player after their journey, and it certainly feels like it. The wide open sky makes the player feel free, and is definitely one of my top gaming experiences. The use of space and scale throughout the game are also used to help create a narrative as well, and I think it does it very successfully. The level of openness in the beginning of the game really created these moments of awe at the desert that seemed to never end. It really felt like I was a tiny part of this massive world, and that feeling of scale is also cemented by the huge buildings that tower above your character. However, the buildings towering above me never felt intimidating, but instead just felt like I was witnessing some grand ruin from ages long ago. I think what really contributed to that was a large amount of vertical and horizontal space that each beginning level had. The open sky above and the wide horizons around me made me feel more safe and willing to explore more to see what hidden things lie in wait. On a side note, I'm glad the game is aware of this and provides collectibles that enhance the experience as a whole, and through that, reward this kind of play. The amount of space in the level is also used to the opposite effect later in the game, while the player is in the underground ruins. The developers intentionally constricted the space the player moves in to make them feel uneasy, and this, along with the introduction of the seeker type enemies called Guardians, really creates this very tense atmosphere that is thick throughout the whole level. This level for the most part is a stealth mission to sneak through the ruins, and it's really cool how by messing with the amount of space visible in a room, it can really change the whole mood of it. Instead of open spaces looking full of adventure, they are instead something the player tries to avoid in order not to be seen. The game also uses very open spaces again in the tundra, but with a much different effect. Unlike the earlier levels, which had, excluding the sandstorm part, very clear and open skies, the tundra takes this open space and makes it feel much smaller. They do this by using a snowstorm to constrict your vision of the area around you, and by making the player walk through thin mountain passes, making the area feel a lot smaller than it actually is. When you finally get out through all the dangers of the tundra, you walk out into a vast nothingness of snow, and instead of feeling a sense of wonder, the storm around you has this overwhelming feeling of dread, and just when you think the game is closing in the walls around you, it opens up beautifully to the blue open sky. The last area perfectly shows how a change in the amount of space can have a huge emotional impact on a story, literally taking you from the lowest point to the top. The peak of the mountain is so open, with the sky seeming to expand infinitely, that you feel like you can go anywhere. The level is also very vertical, and that, along with the fast pace, makes the last level feel very playful and full of life. This design, along with the beautiful choices of color, are what really make this game a joy to look at and play through. But what really takes the game to another level is the beautiful soundtrack by Austin Wintory. Now, I'm no music expert, nor am I going to try to explain the intricacies of how music is written. However, it would be a shame to not even mention how important the soundtrack is to the overall mood and atmosphere of the game. What makes it even more amazing is that it's just composed of a few soloists and some electronic accompaniment. The soundtrack of the game is very cohesive and holds a similar motif throughout most of the soundtrack. The soundtrack changes the mood for this similar arrangement by changing the speed, the instruments, and what accompanies the piece. While the phrasing of the notes is the same, and you can hear recurring themes within the soundtrack, different soloists are given different opportunities to shine in different parts of the game. My favorite example of this is the brass flute solo played by Amy Tatum in the song Threshold. This song begins to play as you enter the huge desert level, and the way she speeds up the motif to give the piece a very powerful, playful atmosphere really fits the explorative nature of this level. I also really enjoy how Carissa Baker joins in playing the harp, which gives the piece a very light and airy weight to it that helps push the idea of exploration and fun. The soundtrack always finds a way to express different moods without sounding too different from the rest of the songs. The song Temptations is a great example of this, with Noah Gladstone dominating this piece by playing the serpent. Temptations plays as you begin to traverse the blue caverns below, and much like the area itself looking very different from the rest of the game, so is this song. This very deep, heavily processed serpent playing throughout the level sounds very mysterious and ambient, which is in stark retrospect to the more playful songs that precede it. However, what keeps it cohesive to the soundtrack is the viola and harp joining in to bring back that sense of wonder and awe. All of these creative elements come together to make something beautiful that immerses the player right from the beginning, and that's what makes this game a piece of art to me personally. The ability of the game to immerse players into a different perspective as they travel through the world and meet new people. That's what art does for people. The reason we experience these emotions when we are taking in art is because we are allowing ourselves to be immersed in the world the artist has created. So video games aren't just mindless distractions or cheap entertainment, they can be something profound that allows people to see something in a different way they haven't thought of before, and give that same cathartic feeling that a painting or song can. And Journey is just one of the many examples of those games that show us the power of this medium. For those of you who made it to the end of the video, I just wanted to say thank you for all your support and that it really means a lot to me. I'd also like to thank all my friends and family who helped me out during a really turbulent time of my life. Everyone's support and kindness has really helped me a lot, and I'm very thankful for it. If you haven't played Journey, I really recommend you do. It's on pretty much every platform, and the runtime for the game is pretty short, so you should probably be able to play it in like one sitting, which is how I recommend you play the game. Huge love goes out to that game company and all the designers and music composers working on it and doing such a great job. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your guys' names. I'm really bad with names, and I'm trying to get better, and hopefully I will in the future. Anyways, thank you all again for watching, and have a great day.